Hello everybody, welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League.
What's that?
In Australia, mate.
Your name's Suj, my name's James.
My name is Suj, but it's not around Fantasy Premier League today. It's People's Poll Day, and today's a non-FPL poll topic. Quite often they are.
Might revolve around Fantasy Premier League if Man City suddenly walked into a 30-point deduction.
It's
That's not going to happen, but
it's fantasy money anyway in some shape or form. But yeah, People's Poll Day, and it's a financial twist today. What are we talking about, James? What were the options and what won?
runners and riders were. It was a close vote. Well done to those who spotted that there was potentially a link between two of the topics, as Gary Robinson pointed out, a Manchester United correspondent. So a 67% chance you'll be talking about Manchester City then. The choices were fake sponsorships, and Manchester City are not alone in possibly having fake sponsorships. We may touch on that a little bit in this podcast. We also ran the idea in the poll of Everton's finances. They released their financial results. They don't make good reading. They are going to escape the muted people were getting excited about, Everton might be in for a points deduction. No, they're going to escape that. But for the time being, I would suggest there is some suspicion that the money they are putting down in terms of losses down to COVID might be substantially higher than what other clubs are suggesting they've lost out due to COVID. A club perhaps of similar size in terms of turnover, etc. Aston Villa have, for example, put their COVID losses at far lower than Everton's, for example. But the winner of the People's Poll vote was the Premier League's ongoing investigation into finances, shall we say, at Manchester City, which has kind of reared its head again over the last week after last week the German publication Der Spiegel released further documentations going back to original ones they'd released in 2018. This time with full PDF documentation of emails in relation to, let's say, where City were getting money from. A lot of it is old hat. But I guess the first place to start here is, as it was titled as such, is the Premier League's investigation into Manchester City.
UEFA.
Because UEFA obviously did their investigation a couple of years ago, and they originally imposed a 2-year Champions League ban on Manchester City, which we know went to the Court of Arbitration for Sport and got overturned. City settled for, I think it was a £9 million fine they paid for failing to cooperate, essentially. And UEFA's case fell flat, primarily because there'd been this 5-year time lapse between the original, let's say, leaked email documents and obviously when they were trying to take City on in court, basically. That's one of the reasons why it fell flat. Why are the Premier League still investigating this?
Well, why did the Premier League investigations take so damn long?
Well, this is it, because
this is not the only example of it. It's like Derby's investigate. I mean, that was in Premier League, it's EFL, but just generally investigations of this type. Why do they end up taking so long?
The Premier League opened this investigation against City in 2018. It's now 2022.
Yeah.
It's 4 years.
Yeah.
And actually, I read in The Athletic that basically if they don't do anything about it before this year closes, that's it. There's nothing that can happen to City because too far will have gone in the investigation for anything to happen. And it could literally be that, couldn't it? That nothing happens, time expires, and then City say, okay, fine, we haven't cooperated. How does it take that long? At which point did the Premier League go, I mean, if you ask someone to do something in the work office, at which point 4 years down the line do you go, have you done that?
Yeah.
I realise this is quite a big investigation, but why does it take so long?
I think one of the biggest challenges with this one specifically is the international cross-border issue of Abu Dhabi. So you've got all of the documentation on City side, but then you want to corroborate it with documentation on the other side. Well, you aren't going to get the same level of cooperation from Abu Dhabi as you will from another European country or somebody with which we have maybe more financial cooperation with. It's a murky world, and I think the cooperation that the Premier League are getting on the other side is probably slim. But also, all of these organisations are in bed with Sheikh Mansour for one reason or another because of the way that country is run. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's he's part of the ruling family, and everything's tied into the ruling family. So, like, who are you gonna cooperate with? Your boss, Sheikh Mansour, or the Premier League? So I think that definitely adds a level of complication into the investigations. I think there's going to be smoke and mirrors all over the place, making it difficult for them. No doubt about it.
Do you want to concentrate on the three areas where the Spiegel claim the Premier League are focusing their efforts towards investigating City?
Yeah.
So the three things are that they're investigating. City
Some are going to
signing
be easier for them to investigate than others.
Well, yeah.
The first. I think,
City signing underage players in violation of the rules, and they hid payments to their former clubs via contacts with their agents. So there's two specific deals that are being looked at. And I also find it very interesting that these two players don't play for Manchester City anymore. One is Jadon Sancho.
Yeah.
It was an investigation into his move from Watford to Manchester City. Do we look back on that with eyes in hindsight and go, oh, that's why they let Jadon Sancho go, because potentially if Jadon Sancho was tearing it up for Manchester City, then this would be more complicated. Where they look at it and go, okay, well, we took the player and actually we let him go for nothing in the end anyway. The other one that's possibly more interesting, which is the new documentation that's come out from the Spiegel last week, is investigation into Brahim Diaz, who was a player that they bought from Malaga when he was 14, which is against UEFA laws in terms of transferring of minors from country to country. It has been suggested that perhaps the family wanted to relocate to England. That feels a little bit suspicious. Officially, Diaz was...
That kind of stuff happens all the time, you know. You need to buy a house for my mum, and you need to do this and you need to do that.
It was the old one with Derby, wasn't it? Tom Ince's mum or something got some stupid agent money or something.
Didn't she get a job there as well, or something like that?
As a scout, didn't she recommend Mbappe or something? Officially, he was signed from Malaga when he was 16. It was then obviously sold on to Real Madrid. It's currently on loan at AC Milan. But obviously, that's new information in terms of the fact that they're potentially looking into that particular transfer. So how do we feel about that? The rules on the transferring of can we say minors?
Yeah, under 16s and minors. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know
underage players.
I don't know what the official legislation is, but I know there was. I think
there's definitely strict rules around it.
Barcelona were one of the clubs who originally really tried to push for it to. This ruling to come in, I think, actually, due to people like Cesc Fabregas moving to Arsenal, obviously, when he was really young and stuff, and obviously went back, eventually going home, as he would have called it, to Catalonia. Interestingly, to get round the what's being suggested by the Spiegel is to get round the payment to Malaga for Diaz when he was only 14, was that the payment was moved through an agent. And then on to Malaga. Do you know who the agent was?
Is it going to be the super agent Mino Raiola?
No.
Okay.
The agent is a gentleman called Pere, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Guardiola, who happens to be the brother of Manchester City's manager.
Guardiola. Okay. Right.
That's good, isn't it?
Sus, as my kids would call it. Anyone that plays Among Us as a game will know. Sus is a word.
Now,
sus.
We're not suggesting that Pep Guardiola himself is implicated here, but that is convenient, isn't it?
Yeah.
Potentially.
Sus. Yeah.
So they're being investigated, obviously, for potential transfer of minors.
I think that's an example of a thing that they're being investigated for that will be fairly easy to investigate. I mean, there'll be much better documentation around that. The transfer of most of these players within Europe, so the likes of Barcelona or other clubs, will also have documentation. And a lot of this documentation, contracts and monies and what have to be filed with the FA or whoever's sanctioning the transfers or the Spanish FA. So I think there should be a paperwork trail here for a lot of this stuff that can be looked into. So it's very much on the list of this should be easy to investigate.
What's the worst thing that happens here? You go, we shouldn't have done that, bang, fine. That's it, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing is like, okay, two players. You mentioned there's two players, Sancho and Diaz. And we know that the volume of players going through these academies is huge, right? Hundreds of players, especially some of these big clubs like Chelsea and City and whatever else. They use them as almost factories for manufacturing talent. You're telling me there's only two scenarios where this has happened amongst every young player?
Well, it might be in the case of a minor moving from an overseas club.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe. And obviously Jadon Sancho did not move from an overseas club.
But I think I think that there is way more of this going on than just the two situations that are being investigated. So I want
probably not just Manchester City. By the way, there's probably a murky trail of many other clubs.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
So it seems a little light at the moment, but maybe it's the start of the floodgates opening for that particular situation for them.
Okay, so the Spiegel also believed the Premier League are investigating Sheikh Mansour for channeling additional funding to Manchester City via the company he used to buy the club and the Abu Dhabi-based sponsors. What do we believe here in terms of the channeling of additional money into the football club, essentially to meet against FFP?
Yeah, it's happening.
And we just let it go, right?
This is not an easy one to police. Lots of people own multiple businesses.
Yeah.
Mike Ashley, for example, was at Newcastle. He owned Sports Direct. He used Sports Direct to sponsor the stadium. He also owned Dunlop and Slazenger, and then he bought House of Fraser, and he bought all these other businesses. He's got loads of other businesses. They're all standalone businesses in their own right, so they can sponsor stuff if they want to. So at what point do you... so there's two sides of it. There's the inflating the value of a sponsorship. So if every club in the Premier League has an airline sponsor, which they seem to have nowadays, and they're all like £5 million a year to be your airline sponsor, but then Manchester City's is 50 million with Etihad, then yeah, probably the value of the sponsorship is too high. And so you're inflating your revenues. The second part of the problem with this is, where does the money come from? Because if Mike Ashley was saying, right, okay, House of Fraser is the stadium sponsor and Sports Direct is the kit sponsor and whatever else, but then he says, right, the House of Fraser sponsorship deal is £20 million. They've paid $5 million. I'll pay the other 15. That's also a different problem, because then it's not coming from House of Fraser. So the two problems: inflating the value of the sponsorship, which then shows you've got more revenue, which then gets you around FFP because you can spend more. And then the other thing is, well, where's the money coming from? So I definitely think the second part of it, if a specific company is saying that they are doing the sponsorship, they should be paying the money. It shouldn't be coming from someone else, anyone else, especially not the guy that owns the football club, because that's definitely scamming. But I think the first half is a little bit more difficult to police, because certain clubs have more pulling power in terms of sponsorship, and so we'll get higher contracts, higher value contracts. Who's to say what something is worth and not worth? Like, did you think the Premier League should put ceilings on the value of certain sponsorship?
When Newcastle took over, they put a block briefly, didn't they, on any sponsorship deals? Yeah, to make sure that everything was getting vetted,
not being
properly,
inflated,
and that sort of thing's probably going to get brought in. My understanding is that Etihad pay, or are meant to pay, to the tune of, I think it's 67.5 million per season for the stadium naming rights and shirt sponsorship of Manchester City. Now, let's also remember that a lot of the stuff that's being investigated is not new stuff, right? This is stuff that's dating back to sort of period kind of anything between sort of 2009 and 2014, basically. We're going back a while here. Does that feel like an inflated figure? And before you answer that, I'll throw in that I checked Manchester United's shirt sponsorship, which was obviously recently signed with TeamViewer, is now their shirt sponsorship. And TeamViewer are roughly paying around about £55 million a season for the shirt sponsorship of Manchester United. Now, Old Trafford obviously doesn't have a stadium sponsor at the moment. So do we think that 67.5 million for City going back sort of 8 years or so here is correct when we compare that. You say United...
Seems right. It's not much more.
It feels a lot.
More. It still is a lot, don't get me wrong.
To give you another example, when Arsenal moved into the Emirates, their stadium sponsorship was, and I think that's run out now, where they've renewed it, and it's probably more, was 15 million a season originally for the Arsenal stadium to be called the Emirates. And, Daniel Levy is looking for between 25 and 30 million per season for the sponsorship of Tottenham Stadium. So if the Etihad, let's put it at the same bracket figure, let's say 30 million a season, are we then saying the shirt sponsorship going back sort of 8 years or so was worth 37.5 million per season when City won their first title in 2012? Fast forward 9 years and United's is 55 million. Does it add up?
Who dictates value?
Well, that's very true.
We might have been in a financial crisis at the time when City got taken over in 2008 or what have you, but it wasn't a financial crisis for everybody.
Clearly not for these guys.
The Middle East, the Middle Eastern countries were doing okay at the time. They didn't have the same issues. I mean, there were some issues. Don't get me wrong, but
part of the issue is the speculation that Etihad have never been paying that money.
No, exactly.
They've only been paying 8 million.
That's the second part of the problem. Yeah. Where's the money coming from? So. I think the Premier League could easily police that, but also the financial regulations in Abu Dhabi are probably not as strict as they are here. Like I've just come back from Dubai. It's all one country, United Arab Emirates, but they're their own regions within it. Abu Dhabi, Sharjah, Dubai, all the rest of that stuff. You can go and buy a property cash in Dubai right now if you wanted to. Right, you can go and buy a flat, I don't know what they cost, $100,000. You can pay for it in readies, mate. So the way that money is moving around, they can do what they like. So they could easily dress it up as, okay, what I don't understand is why Sheikh Mansour hasn't just funneled the money into Etihad, bought, I don't know, 2 round-the-world first-class tickets for 15 million, and then funneled it through to cover their tracks.
Would Etihad then be assessed in the same way? I mean, I don't know how it works in non-football
state-owned.
relations.
I don't know if they're publicly traded or not. So yeah, it's murky. I think
there's nothing to say that hasn't happened. Therefore,
they definitely. I think the Premier League will really struggle to regulate the value of contracts because for different businesses and different spaces in there, like Amazon could want to sponsor them. They're so rich, pay what they like. Who are we to say what they can and can't afford and what it is and isn't worth? There is, I guess, a market value, but value is subjective. Where the money comes from is objective, and that should definitely be looked at.
Where this is a little bit new, and actually I'm sure the City listeners who are listening to this began, this particular part is nothing new at all, and you're not wrong. What's new in Der Spiegel's documentation is the sheer detail of these hacked emails, which include correspondence between City's then financial officer Graham Wallace and one of their directors Simon Pearce. Now, those two gentlemen both gave evidence under oath in this CAS meeting when City obviously successfully won the appeal against their Champions League ban. And there is some thought that the CAS panel of 3 people who ruled that obviously City should get off, partly because UEFA had sat on their thumbs for too long, that potentially these people may have lied under oath by the suggestion of some of these emails. Could
Daily
that
Mail
then
and
come
a few
back?
other outlets have said,
I would not necessarily believe what you
Sunday
read in the Daily Mail.
No, but there is suspicion that it wasn't all as black and white. There was a lot of grey in some of the stuff that was.
So do you think there's any possibility that CAS could come back to it and go, well, hang on a minute, that's not what you said? Because Pearce adamantly said, quote, no, he'd categorically never asked for certain amounts of money for certain
Of course,
companies. If
you have lied under oath, that's a criminal offence, so he could be in big trouble.
Well, yeah, him personally, individually as well. He's looking at prison time if that comes back, isn't it?
Yeah, it's dangerous for him. To have lied under oath is very dangerous. So, watch this space. Obviously, if he's lied under oath, that whole thing will get thrown out, and then it'll be a big can of...
But in terms of
for them.
the Champions League ban specifically, which was obviously going to be City's punishment, I still think it would stand that it's been too far gone in terms of, like, I think UEFA's own precedence was something documentation within 5 years or so. These emails go back like as far as like 2012, 14 and
I think
stuff.
they'd just probably reopen an investigation of some sort. I do think if it comes out that they lied, then there must be a provision to reopen this.
But then if the Premier League investigation obviously hasn't finished and they've now got this information, we're talking about something different here.
Yep.
Do you think City could be deducted points in the Premier League? And we don't mean this season, obviously. We just mean at some point.
Could. Sure. Will they? No.
The more likely here is exactly what they got off with UEFA was the failing to.
In 30 years of the Premier
comply with
League, how many
information.
times has a team been deducted points? Middlesbrough for not fulfilling the fixture, wasn't it?
Portsmouth administration.
Portsmouth for administration.
That's it, isn't it? I think.
There's
I'm
no
sure we're missing
appetite
something,
for it. I don't think there's an appetite for it, especially with the bigger clubs. I mean, how long's this Everton's thing been dragging on for?
Probably more likely would be something like a transfer embargo or something.
Yeah,
wouldn't it? I
that's
think.
what Chelsea had to
or
put
another
with,
large fine or something.
Yeah, I don't think
And
there's any appetite for a points deduction because they want to see the competition not compromised.
It's worth saying that City did pay a fine of £49 million, I think in 2015 or 16, I want to say. So this is where City kind of stand by themselves and say, well, all right, fine, we didn't comply, we've paid fines and stuff. I mean, that's a huge fine to pay, is it £49 million? So they just keep saying, well, we're done with this. And their stance is very much the same. There's nothing new. They've released a statement saying we're not going to respond to, the potential hacking. And it has to be said, his emails getting hacked. Admittedly, what's in those emails is not clever at all, but we've been hacked, right?
Yep.
So, okay. I want to come back on some of the finances. The third thing that's being investigated supposedly by the Premier League is in relation to Roberto Mancini.
Yep.
Who's now obviously manager of the Italian national team, was obviously City manager when they won their first Premier League title anyway, in 2012. And what's being investigated is that a chunk of his salary was being paid by Al Jazeera, not the TV company, but the football club also owned by Sheikh Mansour. So Mancini, it's believed in his settlement from Manchester City, he was being paid by City, I think it was around about 1.25 million a year, which sounds like peanuts now compared to what some of the Premier League managers. I mean, Guardiola's probably on 4 or 5 times that now, I should imagine. But Al Jazeera were paying him 1.75 million for 4 days' work of consultancy or something. Hang on a minute, how does this work?
Yeah.
So you're full-time manager at Manchester City, you're getting paid 1.25 million. You got 4-day consultancy at Al Jazeera, and you're getting paid 1.75 million.
Yeah.
Hang on a minute. Sus on it.
Yes, completely. But especially when the same owner of the 2 clubs and all the rest of it. Now, you get people that sit on company boards, for example, do 1 day a month, and they're getting like a couple of million quid a year and that kind of thing. David Cameron and all that kind of stuff. You see it a lot with former politicians and what have you. So compensation in the millions for days of work rather than even weeks and months of work is not uncommon because it's all the ancillary stuff around it that goes with it. And then they can go and say, oh, Mancini's advising us and whatever else. But that's not the case in this scenario. Like, it's not like they're a big company or a big club, a tiny club in Abu Dhabi, with the same owners and 4 days. Like, what are you going to achieve in those 4 days for that football club? You're not going to get them from bottom of the league to title contenders or what have you. Like, that's completely wrong. So that, I think, is going to be a pretty open and closed book. Should be, in theory, open closed book that it's dodgy.
Mancini, it seems from the correspondence that's been leaked as well, is obviously very clear in terms of understanding what's going on. In fact, the last correspondence was sent by his then agent, who's now his his wife as well. So she obviously had a vested interest in terms of what was happening there financially for the Mancini family as well. So I don't think there was a suggestion that perhaps part of it was Mancini potentially trying to avoid tax payments in Italy, but actually that's not the case. Whatever these payments were actually after tax. So we don't think Mancini specifically is involved in terms of, listen, if he's getting paid the money by, I don't know if he's at fault in any way here at all. Is it his problem if the money comes from part Man City and part Al Jazeera? It's the clubs, isn't it? It's not Mancini, is it? I don't think.
If I said to you, James, you're going to come and work here, and here's your salary, and I'm going to pay you 50% of it cash in hand.
But Fancy Football Scout are going to pay me.
If I say I'm going to pay you in cash in hand rather than on the books, you are complicit.
Am I meant to admit that this happens or not? No, we're joking.
Yeah, euro. I pay James in euros and dollars, cash in hand.
Italian franc. Or Italian lira, sorry.
Lira. That's why James is a millionaire.
I asked, it's a true story. I asked my mum for £1,000 one year. She said, "What do you want for Christmas?" I said, "I want £1,000." She gave me £1,000 of Italian lira. It's like worth nothing, is it?
Wicked. You are if you agree and you take the cash, right,
I'm
and
complicit.
and you don't pay the tax on it and whatever else, you are a little bit complicit. He knew what was going on, so yeah, he is to blame. He is to blame a little bit.
Okay. So many eyes have been raised recently as well in terms of City have got to the top of the Deloitte money list.
Yes.
Has raised a lot of, let's say, suspicion amongst people that that's not particularly right. For example, Gary Neville, he of Sky Sports and formerly Manchester United, said, Man City became Deloitte's richest club in the world this week. That can't happen without extortionate exaggeration of sponsorship contracts. Man City can't be earning more money through sponsorship than Manchester United, Liverpool, Barcelona and Real Madrid. It's impossible. Agree or not?
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think that's why I used the United team viewer comparison. Is that even still, look, on the pitch, Man City far away better than United at the moment, okay? But in terms of the bastion of a football club that Manchester United is, they're still going to be at the top of the tree in terms of sponsorship endorsements.
Yep.
That's clear.
No
also, what is raising suspicion, of course, is this is happening during the COVID period. So you haven't got any... Now, you could say, right, people laugh about the empty had and stuff like that. So, okay, yes, in terms of the loss of stadium revenue, that's going to hit United harder than it would hit City. But then United's still the commercial juggernaut where they'll be selling the sponsorship, selling the shirts overseas, etc. And City surely won't be to the same extent, right? You would think. But I did do a little bit of digging, and actually it's worth saying that for the season, this is for the season 2020-21, City, because they got to the Champions League final and won the Premier League, far outstripped everybody in terms of television and broadcast revenue during that season. They earned more. I know Chelsea won the Champions League, but City, in terms of getting to the final and the amount they were shown by Sky, BT, whomever in England, etc., way outstripped everybody for broadcast revenue by a fair amount, actually. And they weren't top of the tree, actually, in terms of commercial income. It was only top 5.
Right, okay.
So actually, when you balance it out and you consider that they did get to a Champions League final, and this is over the course of one season, and we are saying that during that season there was no commercial income and revenue via gate receipts, then actually maybe it's not that far-fetched. Actually, I looked at it and I actually find it believable.
It's not outside the realms of possibility. You're right. But you would still think that from commercial deals only, when you factor in all revenue, perhaps, when you factor in just sponsorship deals, they'd probably be lower. But maybe
then who was desperate to throw new money at new sponsorship deals without crowds, etc.?
That's true.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think that's as far-fetched as people were necessarily saying, having had a little look at the numbers. Some of the things in terms of to come back to sponsorships are a little bit iffy, and this is where people like Neville are getting their back up in terms of this doesn't sound right. So City have had some cancellations and some agreements over the last couple of years. And this is new, and they're not alone in this, by the way. There are other Premier League clubs doing some really dodgy stuff at the moment, and that's why we put sponsorship into the People's Poll topic. In terms of money coming into the football club from companies that basically look like they don't exist.
Yeah.
I read an article on The Athletic, which I think named Chelsea, Southampton, Villa, and I think maybe Everton as well, where money's coming into the club from sponsors, where when you go down the trail of who these people are, you can't find these people. You can't find a company. You can't find the directors. You can't find a registered address. One of these companies who had a deal with City, the registered address was a house in Watford. A house in Watford. Like, how does this make sense, mate?
I mean, depending on the size of the company, that's not unheard of. Like, a director of a business might have its registered office. He might have it at his home address, which does happen. However, it doesn't necessarily happen for companies that are able to do £1 million sponsorship deals with Premier League football clubs. So it's not impossible, but it's highly, highly, highly unlikely.
Have you been down this route of looking at any of these sponsors?
No.
Can I give you a couple of examples?
Yes.
If I may.
I want to see if they're realistic, unrealistic,
Okay.
or impossible.
So Man City's one of Man City's long-standing partners, a company called Wega, who have also been active in Qatar, where of course the World Cup's happening later this year, and they've been actively promoting this esports World Cup with a $15 million prize pot. Although detail for the tournament is still not materialised, and officials in terms of the World Cup have no knowledge of this whatsoever.
It's not affiliated to the World Cup in any way.
Last month, City parted company with a crypto sponsor after media reports revealed the company had no management team. I forget the name of the company. It was 3K something, I think. But yeah, that's going down the route of who are these people? Once you look at it, it's like they don't exist. So how does Man City sign an agreement with a company like that where there's no directors, it's got a registered address that's obviously like offshore, and it's I saw that there's a few clubs, and this wasn't City. I think it was Chelsea actually were had an agreement with a sponsorship where the registered address for the company was a Jennings Bookmakers on the Isle of Man. What is that? And why is this shit not being investigated?
It's not whether or not it needs to be investigated, but I think this is at a club level. This is a problem at a club level. So, two things: the crypto piece adds an absolute complete other layer of complexity, because crypto money is untraceable, right? So now you can't even go down the financial rabbit hole with it, and a number of clubs are looking at that now. So if sponsorship comes in paid for via crypto, that's going to have a whole world of problems. The piece around due diligence around these companies probably sits at a club level. You've worked in sales before. Within these commercial departments, going to be salespeople. They'll bring deals to the table. I've got so-and-so, and they're willing to pay this money, and they've shown the colour of the money. Someone upstairs is saying, like, get that deal signed. Fine, great. You've got £3 million coming in for that deal, or not. Good, get it signed. Without, have you credit checked them? Have you done your due diligence on this deal? And so on. They probably are too quick to see the money and want to take it than they are to do the due diligence. Like you've seen here, we don't give credit to people unless they're credit worthy and we can get insurance on it. Simple, hard and fast rule. Now, these guys are not going to be credit worthy, but someone somewhere has not bothered to do the check. And so the clubs need to probably have a much stricter vetting process on who they will get into business with, which they don't have right now.
Okay, so what do you think about this one? January 6th this year, Manchester City unveiled a new global sponsorship agreement. The club website promoted the partnership with Mazda, a renewable energy and sustainable development company, by highlighting the launch of a campaign aimed at raising awareness around climate change. Great. What the City press release did not mention, however, is that Mazda is owned by the Mubadala Investment Company. Mubadala is a sovereign wealth fund of, guess it?
Abu
Dhabi. And the chief executive officer of Mubadala is a businessman named
Sheikh Mansour.
You're close.
Okay.
Khaldun Al Mubarak,
Oh,
who is the chairman
of
of
Manchester
Manchester City. This is new.
Yeah.
How's that right?
Nah.
It's not, is it?
That smell. So something like the crypto one that suddenly disappears or what have you. That's just bad management. Something like this, where the owners or controlling interest, persons of specific people of control, and all the rest of that kind of stuff, is corrupt. Simple as that. If it's the same people owning the same businesses, then it has to be at arm's length. There has to be some kind of vetting process. So I think the Premier League might have to say, right, okay, if it's the same ownership, same shareholders with more than 5% in each business or 10% in each business, we need to vet that deal. If it's the same directors within the companies, we need to vet that deal.
When did Newcastle get taken over? Was it November? Or was that October or November?
Yeah, back end of last year.
And they put a block on sponsorship for 6 weeks or so, and this deal with City's gone through in January. Are the eyes in the wrong place?
Yeah. That was...
Or are the eyes just not on it at all?
Well, the eyes are not on it at all, we know. But I think that ban for 6 weeks on Newcastle was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction rather than a strategic plan that the Premier League have in place. But yeah, they need to look into it because, there's two different scenarios there. Bad management, that's a club level. No oversight, that's at a Premier League level.
So do we think City have been fabricating the amount of money that goes into the football club through sponsorships?
Yeah.
We just unanimously in agreement with that. I find it very, and I completely get, and I get
far too suspicious and
whenever we
convenient.
talk about City, we get defence from City fans, and you're absolutely welcome to obviously defend the football club. But I don't think it can be denied that across the board, City are manufacturing, shall we say, some of the income into that football club to meet against sustainability, profit and loss reports, FFP, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
That is ongoing. And I'll add, it's not just Manchester City doing it.
No,
but we are focusing on them.
They are.
Because they are themselves under investigation.
Yeah. Many other clubs are going to come under that same scrutiny in the coming kind of weeks and months. And I think this is where this whole, we've talked about state ownership of football clubs was a debate, and you said that you think there's regulation coming in. I'm not sure how they will, but these are the consequences of state-owned football clubs.
How do we, and I don't think we've ever answered this before, how do we want this dealt with? Like that deal that City have done there in January, how do we want that dealt with? Like what do we want? One of the things, when I reflect on the Newcastle takeover, and we spoke about this a few weeks ago about probably should have spoken up more and said this can't be allowed to go through. The consciousness of me is, as a Tottenham fan, is don't speak up about it because you just sound like you're moaning from a competitive perspective. But we don't actually, and because we spoke about this when we did the Abramovich pod the other week, about this focus would come back onto City and Newcastle. It definitely is going to come around for them. And it's heightened because of obviously what's happened with Abramovich, where I think more of us are looking at it now and going, should have spoke up. This doesn't feel right. This isn't like, you can say level playing field, fine. Some owners have got more money than others, etc., etc. But circumnavigating the rules doesn't feel right. But then these clubs will also, City and Newcastle fans will approach it and go, well, like you're putting restrictions on us to make sure the likes of United and Liverpool stay at the top all the time anyway, which I get that. And that's probably fair game to argue. But we're not comfortable with where this money's coming from, are we? Is the real point here.
No.
And how do we want it dealt with? Like, we still haven't answered it.
No, that was the question I was going to come back to. So the Premier League cannot be responsible for policing this. I don't trust them to.
Well,
because
they're corrupt as well.
It's in their interests to grow the financial side of the game, right? They're selling rights for more and more each and every time a TV deal is done. They're trying to go more and more global. The more money the clubs make, the better.
Well, we know in the end the Newcastle deal was only getting blocked, not because of what was happening in Saudi Arabia, but because of the beIN Sports TV deal was the only thing that was blocking it.
Yeah. So there needs to be oversight and regulation and vetting of all sorts of different elements of it. But it can't come from the Premier League. If you create an independent...
we're back here again.
Independent...
I think you're right.
What's the word? The word I'm looking
Regulator.
for. But a body to regulate. They can't be they can't report to the Premier League. It's like how.
But have you heard the potential latest that the Premier League want to have a say in this independent regulator?
Well, that's the point, right? It has to be.
It's got to be completely
The word
separate.
independent is independent. The FA, we know, are very toothless when it comes to this kind of stuff. They're the only organisation that exists unless it's a government organisation, and the government do regulate certain things. And I think they have seen and want to stick their nose into football a little bit more, with the Abramovich situation suddenly rearing its head, and they've had to get involved with that. So I think, if anything, it will end up eventually having to come from a government level. Now, we don't have time with this podcast to open that can of worms, because they're just as bad as the Premier League. It's not that their intentions are bad, but they're highly incompetent. They don't understand. The people that they will put in to regulate it won't understand football. They won't be football people. It's quite often you see they ask the dumbest questions about simple things. So, yeah, I think the probably best solution is that it's at regulation comes at a government level. They're the ones that need to.
Don't trust them, either.
No, but we're picking the best of a bad bunch.
Yeah, that's happened before in this country. In a way, that's a whole other podcast.
That's politics.
Do we think? All right, let's just approach it from a football perspective for a moment. Do we think Manchester City should be dot points thrown out the Champions League if this comes back around, or do we even care?
Yeah, there should be. If there's no consequence, people's behaviour won't change.
But then, do you think in this case that it would change? Wouldn't City just find other ways, cryptocurrency, whatever? People always try and find a way around it. But I think there needs to be. See, the thing with come back to the points deduction for Portsmouth with administration. It's very black and white, right? If you go into administration, there's automatic points deduction. I think there needs to be certain things that are, if this happens, then this happens. Like very. Well, even that, to bring in like Everton, which we could have ended up covering today, that was the same thing. It was like, so you've got to comply with a certain amount of loss within a 3-year period, but because of COVID, that was getting spread over an average over 4 years. And it seems like it was kind of being left to the clubs to decide for themselves how much money were you impacted by the loss of COVID. And as I said, Everton set theirs at much higher than, say, Aston Villa's, for example.
Yeah, and then those kind of things will happen.
There's nothing legislative to stop that.
But if you breach FFP, what's the punishment? It's not fixed, is it? That's the thing. It's not like an automatic 10-point deduction, automatic 5-point deduction. I think if this happens, and it's proven that it happens.
I think there probably is something.
A fixed amount.
But then it makes you wonder that no one's ever failed to comply.
Yeah. They always find a way around it.
When every year, and this is the other thing I don't get, right? And you can raise your financial hat to this. All I see all the time is football clubs losing money. All the time. Where's the bottomless pit end?
All the time. But
where does it end? Where does it end?
No, it will eventually get... The bigger the numbers get, the bigger the value of the football clubs, the bigger the investment required, the less tolerant people will be for losses. So I think eventually... they will, but some of these guys who are investing look at the top value of the club, not the profit and loss. So if the club lost 200 million, but it's gone from 1 billion to 1.5 billion, net they're still up.
I think what I want is, rather than going back and punishing City for stuff that happened 8-9 years ago, it's like it's gone. Like, I don't agree. People say, I stripped them their titles and stuff like that. Like, for me, it's over the top. Like, I don't want stuff that happens on a football pitch to be removed from history and stuff like that. Like, people were saying, oh, yeah, if Chelsea get stripped from the title, Tottenham win the league in 17 and stuff.
There's a kind of thing
I don't actually want that.
Like, other than, like, doping in the Olympics where people's medals are stripped and you get bumped up and stuff. But it still feels so annoying when you're like...
6 months later, here's your gold medal. Did it feel like it? No, not really.
Exactly. So, I see what you're saying.
What I want, I think, is what you're saying. Put something in place that makes this shit clear, because stuff's getting worse in terms of, and I must reiterate, if you think this is just a Manchester City problem, it's not.
No.
Some of these sponsorship
they're
deals
in the highlight
are wild
right now, just because of the Spiegel article last week and the current ongoing investigation. We will keep revisiting this topic because it's not going away, not just with Manchester City, but any other kind of financial stories within football. There's plenty of others that we do need to keep looking at. And during the off season as well, we'll definitely have more pods around it. If you have any comments, you know where to stick them. Find the tweet at Planet FPL Pod for the podcast. Chuck your thoughts in there.
Don't
or links
sue
to
us
any
for
articles.
our opinions.
No, of course not. Although we'll pay you in Italian lira that James has got 1,000 of somewhere stashed away. And of course, if you want any of our additional content, then head over to patreon.com/Planet FPL, where you can pay in Bitcoin, Ethereum. You can't. You've got to pay in pounds or dollars or whatever your currency is. You can support the show on patreon.com/Planet FPL, and we won't be inflating any of those figures.
No.
Stay safe. Look after yourselves. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll be back at you tomorrow with Sky Fantasy Football. Ciao for now.
Thanks, everyone. Be nice to each other. Cue music, please, man, child. Cut out at the end.